In the darkness of an abandoned garbage dump, a man named Michael comes across a little girl digging through the dirt. But when she suddenly reads the Swedish instructions for his sick daughter's medication, his world is shattered. Who is this child, and why could the truth of her words cost his family their lives? The late afternoon sun hung low over the desolate landfill outside Chicago, casting long, eerie shadows across mounds of trash that stretched endlessly into the horizon. Michael Rivers gripped the steering wheel of his black SUV, his knuckles whitening as the vehicle jolted over uneven ground. He was lost, utterly, frustratingly lost. His phone had died an hour ago, and the navigation system, once a beacon of modern convenience, now mocked him with its silence. The landfill, a sprawling wasteland of discarded dreams and rotting debris, was the last place he expected to find himself. He had come here to scout a location for his new factory, a project that promised to bolster his already impressive portfolio as a successful entrepreneur. But now, surrounded by the stench of decay and the eerie quiet broken only by the occasional rustle of scavenging animals, he felt the weight of his isolation. Michael's mind raced, not just with the frustration of being lost, but with the gnawing worry about his daughter, Ellie. She was back in Chicago, lying in a hospital bed, her small body fighting a mysterious illness that baffled even the best doctors money could buy. The thought of her pale face, her fragile frame hooked up to machines, fueled his urgency. He needed to get back, to be by her side, to do something, anything, to save her. But here, in this forsaken place, he was powerless. As he maneuvered the SUV between towering hills of garbage, his headlights caught something unexpected, a small figure moving among the debris. He squinted, slowing the vehicle. It was a child, a girl, no older than 6 or 7, her thin arms digging through a pile of trash with a determination that seemed both pitiful and haunting. Her clothes were a mismatch of tattered hand-me-downs, a dark purple jacket, far too large and patterned with faded diamonds, hung loosely over her shoulders, and her pants, once bright blue, were frayed at the hems, caked in mud. She moved with a strange purpose, her fingers sifting through the filth as if searching for treasure. Michael's heart clenched. What was a child doing out here alone? He rolled down his window, the stale air of the landfill mixing with the crisp autumn breeze. "Hey kid, what are you doing out here?" he called, his voice rough but laced with concern. The girl froze, her head snapping up. For a moment, she stared at him, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and curiosity. She didn't answer. Michael frowned, wondering if she was deaf or simply terrified of a stranger in a sleek, expensive vehicle. He stepped out of the SUV, his polished black shoes instantly coated in a layer of dust and grime. His tailored jacket, a symbol of his success, seemed out of place in this world of decay, but he didn't care. He approached cautiously, his voice softening. "Can you hear me?" he asked again. The girl nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving his face. But she remained silent, her small frame trembling slightly. Michael sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "What are you doing here?" he pressed, his patience thinning. She shook her head, a mute denial that frustrated him further. "Great," he muttered under his breath. "Just what I need, charades." Then, to his surprise, she spoke, her voice high and thin, like a bird's chirp. "What's a banana?" Michael blinked, caught off guard. "You're kidding, right? You've never had a banana?" She shook her head again, her eyes wide with genuine curiosity. For the first time, he noticed how young she really was, her face smudged with dirt, her cheeks hollow from hunger. Something in him shifted, a flicker of compassion breaking through his frustration. "It's a fruit," he explained, forcing a smile. "Grows in warm places, like Africa." Her eyes lit up, a spark of wonder breaking through her fear. "Africa? Wow. Then I definitely want to try one." Despite himself, Michael chuckled. There was something disarmingly innocent about her, a stark contrast to the grim reality around them. He opened the passenger door of his SUV, gesturing for her to climb in. She hesitated, her small body tensing, but after a moment, he gently lifted her under the arms and set her on the seat. As soon as she was inside, the fear in her eyes melted into awe. "Whoa, this car is huge," she exclaimed, her voice bubbling with excitement. "I've only seen ones like this in the city. Back home, I ride on tractors." Michael listened to her chatter as he rummaged through the glove compartment, pulling out a bunch of bananas he'd grabbed from a gas station earlier. "Here," he said, handing her one. "No peeling needed, just bite into it." She grabbed it eagerly, but ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were the most precious thing she'd ever tasted. Watching her, Michael felt a pang of guilt. What kind of life had led her to this? "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Lacey," she replied between bites, her mouth full. Then, after a pause, she added, "But people call me Amy." "I don't like that name. It's sad." "Why sad?" he pressed, intrigued. She shrugged, her small shoulders hunching. "Because I'm an orphan. No mom, no dad. Just grandma." The word hit him like a punch. Orphan. He thought of Ellie, alone in that sterile hospital room, and felt a kinship with this girl he couldn't explain. "Where's your grandma now?" he asked. "Back in the village, near here," Amy said, her voice dropping. "She's sick. Really sick. We don't have a store, and the doctor only comes once a week. The medicine's expensive," and she trailed off, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Michael's jaw tightened. He knew too well the helplessness of watching someone you love suffer. "And you're out here looking for stuff to sell?" he guessed, his voice low. She nodded, pulling a crumpled $20 bill from her pocket. "I found some old hats, washed them in the creek, and sold them to ladies in town. They probably thought my grandma knitted them, but she didn't." He exhaled sharply, the weight of her words settling in his chest. This wasn't just a lost child, this was a survivor, fighting in a world that had already discarded her. "That's not enough for medicine," he said, more to himself than to her. "Do you remember what it's called?" Amy frowned, thinking hard. "It's long. Written on a paperback home, on Grandma's dresser." Without another word, Michael started the engine. "Let's go get it," he said, his decision firm. He didn't know what he was getting into, but the image of Ellie fighting for her life, and this girl fighting for hers, compelled him forward. Amy's eyes widened, a mixture of hope and disbelief crossing her face. "Really? You'd help?" He nodded, his gaze steely. "Yes. But no more digging through trash, deal?" She sighed, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Deal." As the SUV rolled forward, navigating the jagged paths of the landfill, Michael glanced at her. She sat beside him, kicking her legs absent-mindedly, her eyes darting around the luxurious interior with childlike wonder. He didn't need to be a psychologist to sense her wariness. A strange man in a fancy car offering help? Of course she was scared. But something about her resilience, her quiet strength, reminded him of Ellie and of the fight he'd been waging for his own family. "Where do I turn?" he asked, his voice steady but tense. Amy pointed a tiny finger ahead. "See that big pile over there? There's a path to the left. That's the way." Michael's stomach churned. He didn't like the idea of plunging deeper into this maze of refuse, but he had no choice. As they drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was no accident, that this girl, with her strange knowledge and haunting eyes, was about to change everything. The SUV bumped along the narrow, overgrown path Amy had pointed out, the landfill giving way to a desolate stretch of land that seemed to belong to another era. Michael kept his eyes on the road, his mind a whirlwind of questions. Who was this girl? Why was she alone on a landfill, scavenging like a scavenger bird? And how had she known about the Swedish instructions on Ellie's medicine? The thought gnawed at him, a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. Beside him, Amy chattered nervously, her voice a fragile shield against the silence. "We're almost there," she said, pointing to a cluster of shadows on the horizon. "That's the village." As they crested a hill, the sight that greeted Michael was like something out of a forgotten ghost story. A handful of dilapidated houses, their wooden frames sagging under the weight of time, stood scattered across the landscape. Windows were boarded up or clouded with grime, and the yards were empty, save for the occasional rusted relic of machinery. It was a place abandoned by progress, left to rot like the trash they'd just left behind. Amy's voice cut through his thoughts. "There's our house, the one with the number 3 on it." Michael parked near a crooked gate that hung on rusted hinges, its squeal echoing in the stillness. Amy leapt out, her small feet hitting the ground with surprising agility, and dashed toward the house, shouting, "Grandma! Grandma!" He followed, the heavy, musty air of the village clinging to him like a second skin. Inside, the house was a time capsule of poverty, faded wallpaper peeling at the corners, a cracked wooden table, and a sagging bed where an elderly woman lay, her gray hair tied back in a thin braid. The woman, Zoe, Amy had called her, lifted her head weakly at the sound of Amy's voice. Her eyes, clouded with illness, brightened slightly as she saw the girl. "Amy, where have you been?" she rasped, her voice trembling but warm. I found a nice man, Grandma. He's going to help. Amy blurted, rushing to a rickety dresser. She climbed onto her tiptoes, fumbling for a piece of paper. Michael stepped inside, the smell of damp wood and faint medicine hitting him like a wave. He fought the urge to cover his nose, his gaze sweeping the room. This was a life of struggle, etched into every crack and crevice. Zoe's eyes shifted to him, sharp despite her frailty. "Who are you?" she asked, suspicion lacing her tone. "Let's say I'm a philanthropist," Michael replied smoothly, knowing the truth, that he'd stumbled upon her granddaughter in a landfill, would only complicate things. Zoe let out a dry, skeptical laugh. "Philanthropists don't come out here, son," Amy returned, thrusting a crumpled paper into his hands. "Here, this is the medicine Grandma needs. She says without it, she can't walk." Michael unfolded the paper, squinting at the doctor's scrawl. It was illegible, a maze of loops and lines that meant nothing to him. "They'll figure it out at the pharmacy," he muttered, folding it back up. Zoe watched him, her expression a mix of hope and resignation. "If it's not too much trouble, could you bring the medicine? I'll pay when my pension comes." "No need," Michael said firmly, the words surprising even himself. "I'll get it for free." Zoe frowned, clearly unconvinced, but said nothing. Amy, however, beamed, her face alight with a joy that made Michael's chest tighten. "Really? So Grandma will get better?" "Of course," he said, though the words felt hollow. He glanced at a faded photograph on the wall, a young woman holding a baby, smiling brightly. "Is that your mom?" he asked Amy, nodding toward it. She nodded, her smile fading. "She died when I was 5. I never had a dad." The simplicity of her statement hit him like a blow. An orphan, just like she'd said. Alone, except for this frail woman on the bed. It was too much, too close to the fear he carried for Ellie. "Uncle Michael," Amy said suddenly, her head tilting. "Can I ask something?" "Sure," he replied, bracing himself. "Do you have kids?" He tensed, the question cutting deeper than he expected. "Yes, a daughter." "Where is she?" Amy pressed, her voice soft but insistent. "In the hospital," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. "She's sick, like your grandma." Amy's brow furrowed. "Like Grandma? But you said Grandma will get better. So will your daughter, right?" Michael looked away, a chill creeping up his spine. He hoped so, but the truth was darker. Ellie had been slipping away for weeks, her condition a mystery even to the specialists he'd hired at exorbitant cost. For the first time, he felt the same helplessness Zoe must have felt. "Uncle Michael," Amy said, breaking his reverie. "Can I come with you? To the hospital? I want to see where they treat kids." He stared at her, caught off guard. Why would he agree to this? But something in her earnestness, her naive faith, tugged at him. Maybe he needed that faith, needed someone to believe in miracles when he couldn't. "Fine," he said finally, "but I'll bring you back after." Amy grinned, nodding eagerly. "Deal." As they drove back toward Chicago, the sun dipping lower, Michael's mind churned. The landfill, the village, Amy's knowledge of the medicine, it all felt connected, a puzzle he couldn't yet solve. When they reached the hospital, its towering facade loomed like a fortress, and Amy gasped. "It's like a castle." "If only it were," Michael muttered, helping her out of the car. Inside, the sterile white halls and the hum of machines felt oppressive. He led her to Ellie's room, warning her to stay quiet. When they entered, Amy froze, her eyes locking on the small figure in the bed. Ellie lay there, pale and still, and 4 drip in her arm, looking more like a doll than a child. "She's really sleeping," Amy whispered, her voice trembling. Michael approached, adjusting the blanket over Ellie with a tenderness that belied his earlier frustration. "Too long," he said, his voice thick with emotion. But then Amy noticed something on the nightstand, a small bottle, empty now, its label faded. She picked it up, squinting at the text. "I can read this," she said suddenly, her tone surprised. Michael turned, startled. "You can read Swedish?" She nodded. "Grandma says I learn fast. We had an old dictionary at home." His heart skipped a beat. "What does it say?" Amy's brow furrowed as she studied the label, then spoke slowly. "It says each dose has 200 milligrams of the active ingredient." Michael felt the floor shift beneath him. 200, he echoed, snatching the bottle. He pulled out his phone, fumbling to activate a translation app. The screen confirmed her words. The dosage was 3 times higher than safe. This wasn't medicine, It was poison. His blood ran cold. Someone was trying to kill his daughter. Michael's mind raced as he clutched the empty bottle, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The sterile hospital room, once a place of hope, now felt like a trap. Amy stood beside him, her wide eyes fixed on his face, sensing the storm brewing within him. "This means they're treating her wrong, doesn't it?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a child's fear but also a surprising clarity. "Yes," Michael growled, his voice low and dangerous. He grabbed Amy's hand, his grip firm but not harsh, and stormed out of the room. Every step echoed with a fury he could barely contain. Someone had poisoned his daughter, deliberately, methodically. And he was going to find out who. They raced back to his SUV, the city lights of Chicago blurring past as he drove with a reckless speed that matched his boiling rage. Amy clung to her seatbelt, her small fingers twisting nervously. "Uncle Michael, are you angry?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Furious," he snapped, his jaw tight. He glanced at her, seeing the worry in her eyes, and softened slightly. "But I'll fix this. I promise." His first stop was a private lab he knew well, run by his old friend Leon, a chemist who owed him a favor or two. The lab was a stark, fluorescent-lit space, and Leon met them at the door, his brow furrowing at Michael's stormy expression. "You look like you're about to kill someone," Leon said, half joking but clearly uneasy. "Analyze this," Michael barked, thrusting the bottle at him. "I need to know exactly what's in it and if it matches what was prescribed for my daughter." "Now." Leon raised an eyebrow but took the bottle, his professionalism kicking in. "It'll take time, at least until tonight. I'll call you." Michael clenched his fists, every muscle in his body screaming for action, but he nodded. "Make it fast. This is life or death." As they left the lab, Amy trotted beside him, her oversized jacket flapping in the chilly evening breeze. "What now?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "We go back to your village," Michael said, his mind already shifting gears. "We'll get your grandma's medicine, too. But first, we need answers." The drive to the pharmacy was a blur of neon lights and honking horns, Chicago's chaos a stark contrast to the desolate quiet of the landfill and village. Inside the pharmacy, Amy's eyes widened at the shelves of colorful boxes and bottles, her wonder momentarily distracting her from the tension. Michael handed over Zoe's prescription, and the pharmacist, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense air, began filling it. "You have someone to monitor the dosage?" she asked, eyeing Amy skeptically. "I'll explain it to her grandma," Michael said, his voice clipped. He paid without a second thought, the cost irrelevant compared to the stakes. Amy clutched the bag of medicine to her chest like it was gold, her gratitude palpable. "Thank you, Uncle Michael," she murmured, and for a moment, he felt a flicker of peace amid the storm. But peace was short-lived. Back in the village, the darkness was thick, the lack of streetlights making the crooked houses look even more forsaken. Amy led him to Zoe's home, bursting through the door with a cry of "Grandma." Zoe, now propped up in bed, looked startled but relieved to see her granddaughter. Michael set the medicine on the table, his voice firm. "Zoe, these are your tablets. You have to take them on schedule, no skipping." Zoe's eyes widened, her gnarled hands trembling as she touched the packages. "I don't know how to thank you, son," she said, her voice breaking. "No need," Michael replied, his tone softer now. He watched as Amy hovered near her grandma, her face alight with hope. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was doing something right. But his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. It was Leon. "Michael," the chemist's voice was grim. "The medicine you gave me, it's not what your daughter was supposed to get. The composition is completely different, and the dosage? It's 3 times higher than safe. Someone's been poisoning her." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Michael's vision blurred, his breath hitching. "Poisoning her? Are you sure?" "Positive," Leon said, his tone heavy. "It looks deliberate. You need to be careful, man." Michael hung up, his mind racing. Deliberate. Someone had targeted Ellie, and the only people with access were the hospital staff, the doctors, nurses, pharmacists. But who? And why? His next call was to Tom Grove, a private detective and old ally, known for his ruthless efficiency in uncovering secrets. "Tom, I need you to dig into the hospital," Michael said, his voice steel. "Find out everything about the medicine prescribed to Ellie, who ordered it, who supplied it, who handled it. Fast." "On it," Tom replied without hesitation. "I'll have something by morning." Hanging up, Michael felt the weight of his next move settle on his shoulders. He had to confront the hospital, starting with the chief physician. Back in Chicago, he stormed into the hospital, his presence commanding and terrifying. The night security guard tried to stop him, But one look from Michael silenced any objections. He marched to the chief physician's office, where Dr. Harris, a tired man in his 50s, looked up in alarm. "Mr. Rivers, visiting hours are over," Harris began, but Michael cut him off, slamming the bottle onto the desk. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. Harris paled, recognizing the label. "It's the medicine for your daughter, I presume." "No, it's not," Michael snarled. "This isn't what you prescribed. The dosage is lethal, 3 times higher. Someone's trying to kill her." The room fell silent, the weight of the accusation hanging like a guillotine. Harris stammered, "That's impossible. It must be a mistake." "Mistake?" Michael roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "A mistake doesn't nearly kill a child." Harris flinched, sweat beading on his forehead. "I'll check the records. It could be the pharmacy or the nurse in charge." "Who?" Michael pressed, his eyes blazing. "Give me a name." After a tense pause, Harris whispered, "Sophia. Sophia Bennett, the head nurse. She oversees all medication distribution." Michael's blood ran cold. Sophia. He would find her, and he would get the truth. But deep down, a darker suspicion was forming, a suspicion he couldn't yet face. What if this went higher than the hospital? What if it was someone closer, someone he trusted? Little did he know, the truth would shatter his world in ways he never imagined. Michael stood in the shadows of his Chicago penthouse, the city skyline glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows like a distant, indifferent witness. His mind was a battlefield, torn between rage, fear, and a cold, calculated determination. The revelation that his daughter, Ellie, had been poisoned, deliberately, by someone within the hospital, had ignited a fire in him that refused to be extinguished. But the deeper truth, delivered by Dr. Harris and confirmed by Tom Grove's initial findings, was a dagger to his soul. His own father, Richard Rivers, was behind it. The thought was unbearable, yet undeniable. Tom's voice still echoed in his head from their last call. "Richard's fingerprints are all over this, Michael. He's been funding a shell company that supplies faulty drugs to hospitals, including yours. Ellie wasn't a random target, she was personal." Personal. The word churned in Michael's gut. His father, a titan of industry with a heart as cold as steel, had orchestrated this to free him from what he saw as the burden of Ellie. It was a betrayal so profound it threatened to shatter Michael's last shred of faith in family. But he wouldn't let it. He would make Richard pay, legally, meticulously, without stooping to his level. With Tom's help, he devised a plan, a trap to lure Richard into confessing. They would record every word, every admission, and use it to dismantle his empire and ensure he faced justice. The next evening, Michael drove to his father's office in the heart of downtown Chicago, a sleek tower of glass and steel that symbolized Richard's unyielding power. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened, but his face was a mask of control. He couldn't afford to lose his composure, not now. Inside, the office was a monument to opulence, dark wood, expensive art, and the faint scent of cigar smoke. Richard sat behind his massive desk, his gray hair immaculate, his expression as unreadable as ever. Well, Michael," he said, not looking up from his papers. "It's been a while. You look tense." Michael sat across from him, his jaw tight. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but edged with steel. Richard finally met his gaze, a flicker of amusement in his cold eyes. "Not about business, I assume." "No," Michael replied, holding his father's stare. "You know why I'm here." For a moment, silence hung between them, thick and dangerous. Then Richard leaned back, steepling his fingers. "So, you've figured it out," he said, his tone almost admiring. "I knew you were smart. Just like me." Michael's stomach churned, but he kept his voice even. "Then tell me, did you poison my daughter?" The room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavy. Richard's lips curled into a faint, chilling smile. "Poison is such a harsh word, son. Let's call it a correction." Michael's heart thudded, but he forced himself to stay calm. "A correction? She's my daughter, not a business deal." Richard waved a hand dismissively. "That child has been holding you back, Michael. Your ex-wife left you a mess, and Ellie? She's just another chain. I gave you a chance to be free, to reclaim your potential." The words were a slap, but Michael pressed on, his voice low and dangerous. "You wanted her dead." Slowly, quietly, so I'd never suspect. Richard shrugged, his composure unshaken. "If she'd passed, the doctors would have shrugged, blamed her frail health. You'd grieve, but eventually you'd see I was right. You could have risen again, unburdened." Michael's vision blurred with rage, but he held it in check. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and set it on the desk. The screen glowed, the recorder app active. "Every word," he said coldly. "It's all on here. My lawyer already has a copy." Richard's face darkened, his mask slipping for the first time. He lunged for the phone, but Michael didn't flinch. "Too late," he said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "You're done." The door burst open, and two plainclothes detectives stepped in, their badges gleaming. "Richard Rivers, you're under arrest," one of them said, his voice authoritative, "for attempted murder of a minor." Richard's eyes blazed with fury as they cuffed him, but he spat at Michael. "You're no son of mine. And you're no father," Michael shot back, turning away without a second glance. He felt a weight lift, but also a profound emptiness. The man who raised him, who shaped him, was gone, replaced by a monster. The trial was swift and brutal. Tom's evidence, combined with Sophia Bennett's testimony, offered in exchange for leniency, painted a clear picture. Richard had used his influence to supply tainted drugs, targeting Ellie to manipulate Michael. The courtroom was a circus of whispers and stares, but Michael remained stoic, his eyes fixed on his father. When the judge delivered the verdict, 20 years in a maximum security prison, Richard didn't flinch. He glared at Michael, his voice a hiss. "You destroyed me." "No," Michael replied, his voice steady. "You did that yourself." As Richard was led away, Michael felt no triumph, only relief. The fight wasn't over. Ellie still lay in the hospital, fighting for her life, but justice had been served. Now, he had to focus on saving her. Back at the hospital, he sat by Ellie's bedside, her small hand in his. The machines beeped, a steady rhythm that had become his lifeline. He whispered to her, "Hold on, sweetheart. We're almost there." Little did he know, the next few days would bring the miracle he'd been praying for, and a new beginning for them all. 2 weeks after Richard's arrest, the sterile silence of Ellie's hospital room was shattered by a miracle. Michael sat by her bed, his hand wrapped around her small, frail one, his eyes red from sleepless nights and unrelenting worry. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, a sound that had become both a comfort and a torment. He whispered to her, his voice hoarse, "Come back to me, Ellie. Please." Then, almost imperceptibly, her fingers twitched. His breath caught, and he leaned closer, his heart pounding. "Ellie," he murmured. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing those familiar blue eyes, clouded with confusion but alive. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. Tears streamed down Michael's face as he pulled her into a gentle embrace, the weight of months of fear and anger dissolving in that single moment. "You're here," he choked out. "You're really here." Ellie managed a faint smile, her voice soft. "I was so tired of sleeping." He laughed through his tears, holding her tighter, feeling the life return to her fragile frame. The doctors rushed in, their faces alight with disbelief and relief. "She's stable," one of them said, shaking his head. "It's a miracle." For Michael, it was more than that, it was redemption. The nightmare was over. Richard was behind bars, the hospital staff had been overhauled, and Ellie was safe. But the road ahead was still long, and he knew he couldn't walk it alone. A few days later, he kept his promise to Amy. Driving back to the village, he felt a lightness he hadn't known since before Ellie's illness. The landscape was still bleak, but the sun seemed brighter, the air cleaner. As his SUV pulled up, Amy burst out of Zoe's house, her face split with a grin. "Uncle Michael," she shouted, running toward him. He caught her in his arms, her small body warm and full of life. "Slow down, kiddo," he said, laughing. "How's your grandma?" "Better," Amy said, words tumbling over each other. "I read to her, and she told me stories, and I even learned to bake cookies." Zoe appeared on the porch, leaning on a cane but with a strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The medicine Michael had brought had worked wonders, and her gratitude was palpable. "I never thought I'd see you again, son," she said, her voice steady but warm. "I always keep my word," Michael replied, meeting her gaze. Amy tugged at his sleeve, her eyes shining. "How's Ellie? Is she okay?" "She's much better," he said, smiling. "And she wants to meet the girl who saved her life." Amy's jaw dropped. Then she beamed. "Really? I want to be her friend." "You will be," Michael assured her, ruffling her hair. "You've got a whole life ahead to do that." In the weeks that followed, Michael took decisive action. He bought Zoe and Amy a small, cozy house on the outskirts of Chicago, close enough to the city for support but far enough to retain the quiet they cherished. He ensured Zoe had regular medical care, and Amy was enrolled in a local school, her eyes wide with wonder at the prospect of books, friends, and a future. Ellie, now out of the hospital and slowly regaining her strength, bonded with Amy instantly. They spent afternoons riding bikes in the park, drawing with chalk on the driveway, and giggling over shared secrets. For Michael, watching them together was like seeing the pieces of his shattered life come back together. The emptiness that had haunted his penthouse was gone, replaced by laughter, warmth, and the chaotic beauty of family. One evening, as the sun set over their new home, Zoe joined Michael on the porch, her step surer now. They watched Ellie and Amy play in the yard, their voices filling the air with joy. "Well, son," Zoe said, her voice soft but firm, "are you happy now?" Michael looked at the girls, then at Zoe, and nodded. "Yes," he said, the word carrying a weight of truth he hadn't felt in years. "Now I am." It wasn't a perfect life. The scars of Richard's betrayal would linger, and the memories of those dark days would never fully fade. But there was something real here, something worth fighting for. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through the law, and that victory had given him a new purpose. He had saved not just Ellie, but Amy and Zoe too, weaving their lives together into a tapestry of hope and resilience. As the stars began to peek out, Michael felt a peace settle over him. The fight was over, and he had won, not just for himself, but for those he loved. He knew the road ahead would have its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, he believed they could face anything together. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let us know what you think in the comments, he might have said, if this were a story for the masses. But for now, it was enough to sit there, watching his daughters play, knowing that justice, love, and second chances were possible even in a world that often seemed determined to prove otherwise.